Okay, well, my name's Mark Smith. This is my wife, Jane, and we're at Aspen Island Ranch, here a little bit south of Lavina and west of Highway 3.
Well, it goes back to 2001. We were in a house, fairly new house, and it developed mold, black mold in the crawl space. And so I ended up bedridden for the better part of a year. Yeah. And Mark and our two kids at that time also got sick. So long story, really short, is we discovered that was there and had to rebuild our health, and discovered that it wasn't going to be medications that got us back on our feet. It was totally changing how we ate. So we went completely organic in about a week, just ditched everything and raw organic food. And after we rebuilt our health by 2006, we realized it was important to become part of the solution in getting organic food production going. And we realized it was a small family farm model, not big ag wasn't going to save the day. And I was a practicing physician at that time. I did special needs pediatrics. So I understood how important nutrition was for rebuilding health. And then we started looking for a good grass farm, I guess, to raise grass-fed organic beef.
Exactly, and it just became something that was so apparent to us that we needed to make a change in the way we ate. And with the research and everything that we did, it was just so blatantly obvious that chemicals in what you eat impact your health directly, and in a bad way, not in a good way. So that's how we came about here. How we ended up in Montana is we started searching for ranches that might be suitable, might be large enough, and then inside of a budget. Because the closer you get to California, the more prices are absolutely crazy. And so we just kept kind of looking and moving. And then one day we were in Pocatello, Idaho, in a hotel, and looked at an ad. And since we were already in Pocatello and the ad was for up here at Big Timber, we thought we'd come up and take a look with that realtor. And that one thing led to another. Eventually, we ended up settling on this ranch. So we were able to close that deal and get up here in 2006, August of 2006. So, geez, it's a long time ago now. But 14 years here, next month, or August, I guess. And
15 August, I thought.
No, 6 minus 20s.
Never mind.
14 years. Anyway, and we kind of settled into this. Now, whenever you buy an organic place, it's not organic until it's certified, and there's a whole process to go through to do that. However, having said that, if a given piece of land has not been substances that are prohibited haven't been applied to that particular set of land in the last 3 years, one can get organic certification based on the previous owner or the previous manager's affidavit that no commercial pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, and some other things haven't been applied onto the land. So organic is really a land-based system where chemicals are eliminated. And you have a system plan that is set up accordingly, and you go by this plan on what you can apply when you apply, if you apply anything. And there isn't a lot of things left to apply once you eliminate those man-made chemicals, those big molecules that stay in the soil and mess up soil ecology so badly. So we kind of fell in love with the idea of beef. Jane has family who's down in Wyoming right now that have been ranching for 60 years now. Your uncle.
I remember my grandpa before that.
I grew up around Elko, Nevada, in northern Nevada, working on ranches, and I always liked cattle. I could never get cattle out of my mind. I really like the ecology of them. I just like the way they are, and so that kind of led us to this, and that's why we're here, and that's how we're going to do it.
One of the problems we had finding a good ranch that we could turn into a grass-fed organic beef ranch was so many of the ranches that we looked at had been recently sprayed, and we'd have to wait 3 years. And in our mind, we wanted more than 3 years for things like Roundup to break down. And this one also, they had rented out the pastures, and so there was a lot of weeds, there was a lot of overgrazing, which Mark will address.
Man.
So we were excited about what we were going to produce, but we were also excited about rehabbing the land.
Certification is a process that is mandated by the National Organic Policy, which is from DC, and it's implemented in all the states. It requires that a producer have a system plan that is detailed enough to address all aspects of whatever they're going to be producing. In the case of cattle, you have all aspects of how the cattle are handled, how your supplements that you're going to use for the animals, for example, salt, and I'll probably talk about that at some point in time. A lot of it is environmental, where you're talking about being conscientious of everything from insects to prairie dogs to muskrats and dead standing trees for the cavity nesters, etc. So it looks at the big picture of how the land is and what you're going to do as part of producing your product that you're going to make. Now, in our case, it's just certified organic, 100% grass-fed beef. So I don't have to worry anything about what we're going to do about grain storage and things like that. But there is details in a given production plan for that type of thing, whether it be dairy or chickens or all of it. It addresses all those things right down to the crop aspects and what needs to be done to do that. So you can you need to get somebody who is a certifier that is part of the National Organic Policy Network that goes through and at least once a year inspects you to make sure that you're doing what you said in your plan and keeping the keeping the spirit of the rules and regulations intact. It's not perfect, but it's the best we have right now. And everybody that goes through this situation gets a certificate. Sales below $5,000 are exempt. So if you're going to have a certified organic operation and you have sales above, you need to get a hold of a certifier. In the case of Montana, the state of Montana thought that it was important enough to have that aspect, and they have a certifying agent. Georgiana Webster heads up that in Helena, and she has a very small staff that takes care of all the administrative paperwork and inspections that it takes to run that. So that's what it takes to really get certified organic in a nutshell. Well, the grazing management philosophies are going to vary as much as any given ranch is going to vary. But in our case, we kind of employ all the above. We'll employ electric fencing. Not a lot of commercial ranchers will do that. We do a lot of rotational grazing, especially in this part of the country. They don't do a lot of rotational grazing. We built fences specifically to stop cattle from entering a given area that we want to rest and rotate. So we do a lot of rest rotational. It is my belief in this part of arid Montana that gang grazing, as it's called, which is where you put a whole lot of cattle on a very small piece and graze it very intensely, only can be worked in the spring for a short period of time. Otherwise, you'll damage that piece of land because we don't have rainfall, or it's intermittent in such a way that it doesn't lend itself to being able to mob graze that particular piece down. So it's more of a rotational activity that happens. And there's places already on this ranch, it's June 12th, 13th, that have been grazed 3 times in a rotational basis. And the idea being that you let the plants recover. Now, because of the size of many of the ranches, and we have a place where we're going to look at where cattle will stay on it for a much longer period of time. But in general, commercial guys in this part of the country will leave cattle on place on a given pasture a lot longer than we will. So we employ rotational grazing with all kinds of means to divide and make the cattle use, number one, fresh grass, because they really appreciate that. Our cattle get used to me, and I can just holler at them. And if it's a nice day like today and calm, if they can hear me, they'll come running because they know it's probably time for them to move, and they move quite easily for that reason. They get used to it. It's keeps the cattle calmer. It's just a pleasure to. I've always loved cattle, as I said earlier, but it's just a pleasure to be around them rather than having these hulking brutes that are threatening to, really mess your health up in a short order. You have these cattle that are more docile and more used to moving around.
And rotating too helps with the parasite load. If you're moving them and they're eating fresh grass and not eating where their manure is, you're going to decrease the parasite.
Oh, absolutely. Load. That is a really good point, and it's a very important point. Mm-hmm. Horn flies, by moving them away from their manure piles, fresh manure piles, you try to get away from the horn fly cycle, which is about 21 days. And so we do that. There's also other considerations like, I'll get into those as we get out in the pasture. Like I have a particular target plant that is kind of an indicator species in my mind out here, and I'll talk about that a little bit when we get out a little bit later on the tour. So all those things are employed to try to help the land. And when I say the land, I'm calling it, I think I coined a new word. Maybe you've heard it, maybe you haven't. It's the detritosphere. The detritosphere is the place where the dead organic matter is being broken down by millions and millions of microorganisms and earthworms. The soil is the detritosphere. But soil is kind of this word. So last week I was really thinking about that. And I was thinking about how the earthworms were detritivores, right? They eat dead stuff. Well, it's the detritosphere is the soil. And that's really the heart of what organic is about. Taking care of the soil. Whatever you do above the soil is one thing, but that soil is all important. Well, not all weeds are bad, for one. In fact, we have a weed, and we'll probably see some of it, Russian knapweed. When we first started, we had some Russian knapweed monocultures. So we had to actually physically build a fence around those and actually kill them. Because at that point, there's nothing else growing there except for that weed. But we're excluding it from the greater pasture, and that way that fence would then have to stay up for 3 years. So there's that method. There's a method of pulling weeds, man. We pulled weeds and pulled weeds and pulled weeds.
We moved up here, and our kids that are pretty much all men now, we had 3-year-olds, 7, 9-year-old, 8, 9-year-old. So we'd go out as a family of 5 before the sun hit, too hot, and we would go pull and pull and pull and pull. And then we did some spraying with clove and cinnamon oil. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that was an adventure when
it's a burn down
seal breaks on your.
But see, that was a natural product. It's actually cinnamon and clove oil. It actually burns down the given plant, and we had some success with that.
Yeah.
Mostly it's manual though. I just went through the corral area the other day and actually physically removed some hound's tongue that we have over there. I mean, we don't have terrible weed problems like a lot of places, but we have weeds, and we just need to make sure that they stay in balance. Jumping back to the case of the Russian knapweed, it's actually, when eaten by cattle, and they do eat it,
that's what I was gonna.
It's actually a dewormer. The chemicals in it are that strong that it actually helps with the parasite load in the animals, and they come along and take the tops of it off, and it can be a very good thing. So where weeds and cattle are concerned, it's not all bad, because a lot of times you drive down the road, you might see mustard. Well, mustard's that kind of fluffy yellow plant that's about waist high sometimes. It ends up being that umbrella plant that has nothing on it and just tumbles. A cattle will get on that mustard, especially when it's flowering, and eat that. If it's green, cattle will definitely try it for the most part, and can help with that. So we don't take a big view about a given individual weed plant as much as we take care in making sure it doesn't get out of control. Now, one exception with bull thistle, I'll stop whatever I'm doing and go muck a piece of bull thistle out if I happen to see one.
And as we've seen the pastures come back to some of the weed issues, like we had that monoculture of the Russian knapweed, as the native grasses have been able to come back in because it's not getting overgrazed, the grasses have actually pushed out quite a few weeds and even the knapweed. And we had lots of cheatgrass, and particularly in the drive when you came in, there were some cottonwood trees just covered with not knapweed, cheatgrass. And the native grasses have just come in and pushed it out, and it's been,
For the most part, there's still some there, but
Okay.
that's just overgrazing and making sure you, because there's not a lot of shade on this place, so you don't want to be parking the cattle under the trees all summer long and letting them just destroy whatever is there. And
Yeah.
you got to be mindful of that. And rotation on and off helps a whole lot, especially if you can get a rainstorm or two in between, bringing it back. And a lot of people think that 6 weeks is somewhere about where they like to be able to rotate. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. So there's a flexibility that comes. I'll talk a lot more about this, I think, as Pat and I get into our discussions outside when we go outside later. Well, it's so dependent on the snowfall. Once the snow gets so deep, you're pretty much forced to have to feed hay, because cattle will dig somewhat, but once it gets crusted or too deep, or both, they must have some sustenance. So we have hayfield, and we're going to talk about hayfield improvement, what we do a little bit to do that. You don't need to have equipment. Our neighbors are happy to use their equipment and have me pay them to actually come in here and hay this place without having to take all the depreciation, all those kinds of things, and the sheer expense of it. Not to mention the maintenance and the mechanical expertise. Now, I can mechanic, but I don't like to mechanic. Although I'm getting better at it, and I'm learning to, in a lot of ways, like it, only sometimes. So there's that aspect of it. Grazing all the way through, the key is to rotate and make sure you have something left come wintertime. And then if you have open periods or a whole open winter where there's just not a lot of hay, your hay, where there's just not a lot of snow, your hay usage is going to go down, and you're going to be able to let those cattle pick and choose what's left out there for basic rough carbohydrates, and you'll always want to supplement them a little bit with some good hay as well for protein purposes. But the thing about it is that cattle and cattle size is a very important thing. We'll probably talk some more about that. If you're going to do grass-fed cattle in any aspect of it, with grazing through the winter, you have to be very sensitive to cattle size, and cattle size means how big are they. I mean, there's 3,000 pound commercial cattle bulls out there now, and 2,000 pound 1 ton mama cattle. Now that 1 ton mama cattle might make a 1,000 pound carcass, but will kill cattle when they're live weight 1,050, 60, 80 pounds. So the size of cattle is very important when you're thinking about grass feeding, and particularly when you're going through the winter. So those giant cattle, I euphemistically call diesel cattle. I don't know whether it's new as much as it is a throwback to the way it used to be a lot more, I think, when cattle were, well, let's just take that 2,000 pound mama cow that's out there in some people's pastures, not here for sure. But it used to be that the cattle used to be 600 or 700 pounds mature. And so with crossbreeding and all these improvements and so forth, they've been able to crossbreed these cattle up in size. They brought in different European breeds that are naturally larger animals and crossbred them up and up and up and up. And it seems like more and more. The other thing that comes with that is regardless of the size of the cattle, the temperament of the cattle is really important, and you want to have cattle that are docile enough so that if I'm working them alone, and I often do, Jane doesn't have to always check in and make sure I'm not getting stomped or laying there not able to get up because I've been disabled. It helps a lot to have that nice mentality. As I said, they get to where they understand who I am and trust me, where they're not so frightened when I put them in the corrals if I need to do something to them or sort something off or put one down a chute to pull porcupine quills. So it's not so much that it's a new philosophy. It's really a rebirth of old thinking that is brought forward with a lot of science that is now formally written about, known, all these rotational things like that. But it's old stuff brought forward, and now we're just applying it now.
And also with some of the modern ag techniques, when they feed cows corn-fed beef, they can get temperament problems. Just like people, when they're full of chemicals, can have all sorts of mental health disorders. Cows can get aggressive, and with growth hormone implants that they'll stick in their ears to grow them up, they can get aggressive. And there's stories of dairy cows after so many years they get too aggressive, and they have to take them out of their production because they're dangerous. And we found, when you don't have all those chemicals, the likelihood you're going to have a pleasant cow to work with goes way up. And it also it's just better that way. We worked with some, we grew up with cattle, going to families' cow ranches, and then working with some people around here. And the hot shot, it's the, they're quick at getting at and yelling at them, and we would come home, we'd say, we just don't want to do that. We want, a more harmonious relationship with our animals and not have so much stress and worry of our own safety. So the more I looked into it, in terms of an animal health as well as our safety, there's some obvious benefits of having healthy cows and a safe working environment.
Yeah, and so it's an integrated thing about what is the whole of the ranch doing, and what is the whole of that detritosphere doing. One of the things that interrupts that a lot on commercial operations, since we're talking about sort of differences, is this whole thing of what do they call them? Parasitides, right? The ones that kill internal and external parasites on animals. It's a shorthand for a back pour is what it's called. It's a chemical that's so powerful when poured on the back of an animal along the length of its spine, it kills all the internal pesticides and all the external pesticides. But here's the thing about that chemical. It's so strong that when the cattle, in every pile of manure that the cattle makes, underneath that, it'll kill every organism that's there for up to 4 years. And so that is a real problem, because they treat cattle that are going to end up in the market as well with that to help them grow better, to take the parasite load off. Well, it helps them grow better. But here's the thing. That treatment is usually once every 6 months, and there's only a 6-week elimination period before they can be slaughtered. So 2 months ago, that steer might have been treated with dewormer, and the residual on the label says that it's still active for another 4 months, but you're going to be eating that. That's the kind of pernicious chemical use in commercial operations that ends up in our bodies. And that doesn't even go into the problems with feedlots. E. coli 157 was not a problem until the last 30 years or so. It was not even heard of, and that's because of the feedlot and the ration and the way they have those animals packed in. What happens when you commercially or in any way feed cattle a high carbohydrate diet is the insulin response is kicked in, just like in people. And we have this type 2 diabetes problem where people are eating processed food. Well, if you do that to cattle, you have the same problem with them. And their insulin circle starts going, and they start putting on weight because they're eating this high carbohydrate diet. Well, that's a big deal, because now when their insulin and their glucose is out of whack, and the doctor can really help me with this.
Doing a good job.
The chemical nature of their blood, that is the acidity, the basic and acidity balance of their blood is out of whack. They're more acidic. And so in that acidic environment, this thing called E. coli 157 can grow. A purely grass-fed beef does not have E. coli 157 because its pH is high enough to make sure that that particular E. coli, and it's E. coli 157, right? So that means there's 156 before it. Some E. coli are very beneficial to you, but that E. coli 157 in people doesn't get along. And so that's just an example of what happens in a lot of in all commercial operations. It changes the nature of what the beef is. Right, well, there's two really forks to this. I mean, this direct-to-consumer is getting very big and very important to us as well. The direct-to-consumer is about 60% of our revenue. And secondly, we're part of a cooperative that sells these animals live to a buyer that the beef actually ends up in Whole Foods markets in Florida and some other places, and they have other outlets for it. So those two outlets really help us a lot. But this person to person I really like it because I'm delivering to a person's home, looking them in the eye, and knowing that I'm giving them a product that's not going to be harming their health. It's actually going to build it up. And so we're working on that. This whole COVID-19 thing has really helped that because it's brought up awareness. It's brought up awareness about this whole issue of and the responsibility of having all of our eggs sort of in 150 processing plants process 98% of all the animal protein that's done inside the United States. 150 plants, and it used to be that there was a couple 100,000 or so, and that would be a nice number if we could get back to that. So it's pointing out the fragility and the unsustainability of this giant food system that we have, and it's bringing people back the idea that they want to know, particularly their meat, where their meat's coming from. It's real important.
When we first moved up here, we would go to Billings has a home show, and we would go down there and meet people on it. It was nice because 14 years ago, organic beef was just getting going, and so it was interesting to meet people. And some people had heard of it, and they're like, "Oh, that's just overpriced, conventional meat," and you don't spend a lot of time talking to those folks. But then you'd run into the people that were like us. They had research. They were looking for a local organic, and so that was fun. But as time has gone, the learning curve of people has gone up. It's gone up significantly, and we'll get people that they've got health issues. Some people, their doctor refers them, go find grass-fed organic beef.
Along with our person-to-person, a lot of the important part of marketing as well is word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And as this COVID thing has brought to the fore this whole need to examine the fragility in our institutional food system, people are talking to their neighbor a little bit more, and people are actually saying, yeah, I want to participate in knowing where my food comes from. And that means that we live here, but we participate in a very small loop. In other words, these cattle go from here 40 miles to Columbus, and then for the most part, just another 40 miles to people's homes, a lot in Billings. And this model is very good because we have a certified organic processor in Columbus, and people understand that. Instead of having these cattle go 1,200 miles to the middle of Nebraska to get nice and fat and then get shipped again somewhere in Iowa to be processed, and then after they're processed into big pieces, shipped all over the country in their various parts, again, thousands and thousands of miles. They understand this. So it's a real start to finish progression of looking out for the soil, the things that grow on the soil, the things that eat the things that grow on the soil, and the whole process of getting that protein back to people and being able to keep those proceeds inside of a generally small community. We do most of our shopping in Billings. I pick up things when I go through Columbus from time to time, and it keeps our local economies intact, growing, vibrant, instead of shipping all that thing to the middle of Iowa for processing.
Or worse yet, beef coming in from out of the country that you don't know.
Yeah.
Is it truly organic, even though it has the stamp of organic? Because that's been a problem with organic food coming from other countries. If it's coming across on a cargo ship, the ship's manifest gets changed on the way. And so that's
there's just all kinds of fraud that's a little bit easier than it being inside. So people are getting this idea of person to person, wanting to participate, wanting to know where their food is coming from.
Mark's side is the animals and the ground and making that as healthy as possible and the customer relationship. And I've been, I'll add my bit on like organic herbs that we can use. But the thing I want to hit on before we finish this morning is ultimately, and last year I presented a talk at MOA about why do we raise organic food? Why do organic producers produce good food for customers? And of course, it's a meaningful way to make a living. But for me, I ate organic food to rebuild my health when I was bedridden. And a lot of people are beginning to understand, like I said, their physicians refer them to get organic food because they understand that it's nutrition that rebuilds their health. And so one of the things I like to do when we have our customer appreciation barbecue once a year is, see how people's health have changed. And we've had customers who, one guy, if he ate conventional beef, his feet would blister and peel. And so his wife just bought a few steaks and said, just try this, it's organic beef, maybe it'll be good. Well, he ate it and he's never had that issue again. We've had other people who just didn't feel well and they would start to eat it. And so...
or we'll have children who won't eat commercial beef, but they'll put this beef in front of those children, and those children will suddenly become ravenous beef lovers.
Yeah, when Mark delivers meat to those kids, he's the rock star because he's like, it's the beef, and we have other customers that call it beef candy.
Oh yeah,
and
that's pretty fun.
But it's
cow candy.
For cow candy.
Yeah.
For me, this is why any producer produces organic food, is because the value of your customers' health, the value of their lives is priceless. This is why we do what we do, because when somebody makes food that people are going to eat, the standard of quality and the ethics that goes into producing it has to be up at excellent. It can't be mediocre, and it certainly can't be, like some of the seafood coming over, we've learned they grow the seafood in raw sewage, right? Just disgusting. You wouldn't do that for your worst enemy. And so the thing I love about organic is that you have people that not only love their environment, they want to take care of the land and their animals, but they also realize the health and nutrition benefits, because if you have a growing healthy economy, local economy, but you also have people that are eating organic food and their health is improving, well then how much more has your community improved? And I mentioned, Roundup glyphosate. That's something I've been looking into. There's a lot of research going on at MIT with Dr. Stephanie Seneff, connecting everything from mental health issues, thyroid issues, gut issues, and of course now the cancer issues coming up. And if you can eliminate that from food production, you have now improved people's health dramatically. So that's one of the big pluses for me. I rebuilt my own health with it, and then watching people do it themselves. And then also Mark touched on the decentralization of food production. As long as you're dependent on just a few producers or few processors, you have this, I see it as a giant liability, because if any one of those cogs stops turning, you have what we had where people were hoarding food or stores running out of protein. But,
right, especially during this past COVID problem where we had the shutdowns and that. I sort of sat down, thought through this a little bit, and I came up with this, that these large protein processors were made in the name of efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
But efficiency is the mortal enemy of resilience. And person to person, small decentralization takes the risk of that disruption out. So I had several of our customers call and say, "Is everything okay? We're supposed to be getting back." I said, "Everything is exactly on schedule. We have had no disruption, no problem whatsoever, and your beef will be delivered exactly on schedule." And that's the kind of thing that these large institutional problems inside of our country have shown and that need to be dealt with. And so one of the things that is going to improve this problem is this back to basics, back to person, back to, well, it's intimate is what it is. It's an intimate relationship with people who you're seeking to build into their life. And so that's what it's about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that decentralization is dehumanizing in all sorts of institutions, and this is just another one. If you can decentralize it, you've now recognized the value of the people producing it, right? We're not just
you don't
producers.
recognize it,
We're ranchers, and our customers aren't consumers. And I was going to elbow you and use that word, but I can't stand the word consumer because I think of biology and medicine. We went through the cycle of life, and consumers, I think of earthworms, not people. So it's nice to...
Yeah, and we do try to make sure that these are customers, these are people, these are families, and they're not these consumers.
Yeah.
They're just eaters, for example. No, it's more than that. And the more we can return and build into people's lives, the better it's going to be.
Yeah.
One family at a time, even at that small level. It's large, though, at the same time. So one of the things that comes up a lot of times is, organic's just expensive. But like the doctor here says, have you heard about the Roundup and cancer? And I'm pretty sure that a little bit more now is going to be a lot cheaper than your chemotherapy and your cancer treatment later.
Or night
by far.
Cardiac care center.
Yeah, one night in cardiac care center just took care of your organic food increase that's incremental and small.
For about 10 years.
For about 10
20
years. 20 years, yeah.